So, welcome to the Agile Coaching Exchange. This is our first session after our summer break, and so it's great to see so many of you back here again. Lots of familiar faces, but also lots of new faces as well. So tonight we have Judy Graham joining us. And I first met Judy, it's probably a little bit of a personal tale, but I first met Judy when I was doing a shift in a coaching clinic at a conference, and she picked me to be a coach du jour, to have a little conversation about how we can kick off like communities of practice. And little did I know that 30-minute conversation was actually going to bloom into a friendship, where I got to work with Judy, and I now consider Judy to be my friend. And Judy's actually working as an agile coach, lead practice, very great amount of experience working in that agile space. And so it was a no-brainer for me to invite her along tonight to share some of her experiences with you. So pleased to welcome Judy, who I'm glad to call my friend. So I'm going to hand over to you, Judy. Take it away. Don't let me down, girl. Don't let me down now.
Oh, God, no pressure. No pressure. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It was about 3.5 years ago as well now, Helen. Quite a while. Okay, so today I was going to talk to you a little bit about the elusive high-performing teams. So let me tell you a little bit about myself first. So as Helen said, I'm currently an agile coach, but right back in the 90s, actually I did start in the 80s. I started probably before a lot of you were born. But I started to use practices that maybe today would be considered falling into the agile camp. But what has always puzzled me is why, some teams seem to really struggle whilst others thrive. What is different about these teams? Why are high-performing teams so elusive? So in my highly interactive talk today, because I expect you all to bounce ideas at me and give me your thoughts, I'll be telling you some stories about teams I've worked with, how some achieved that elusive high performance and how some just couldn't and could never. I'd also like to spend some time explaining about some work that we did in 2022, so just last year, where I spent a lot of time with just 2 teams trying to lift them from a very unhappy place to somewhere much better. So let's have a think. What is a high-performing team? Anybody like to call out how you might describe a high-performing team? And if you're feeling shy, feel free to put it in the chat.
Bringing out good results.
Yeah, good results.
Having a good climate in the team.
Good climate.
I would say it's a team with an environment that can really perform.
Yeah.
Not just the team itself, but working locally, these kind of things, etc.
Yeah. So I would describe it maybe as you've got a group of individuals, and they work really well together because they're trying to achieve a common goal, and they've got some key traits that you've called out already, I think, including like strong communication and collaboration. They have a shared sense of purpose, and a vision and a commitment to excellence in everything that they do. So just having a look at that picture, I'm in that crew. Can anybody work out where I am in that boat? Does anybody know how to count backwards or forwards in an 8?
Are you number 15?
No, I'm not the cox. I'm not the cox. No, I'm actually rowing in that boat.
I think the 4th from above.
Yeah, well done, Holger. Yeah, so I rowed at 4 in that boat. I was in my 20s. This was probably the best crew I've ever rowed in. And the reason it was the best crew is, we weren't very good, really. We were just club rowers. We had nobody that was rowing at international level or anything like that, but we got on really well. We really understood what it was that we wanted to achieve and how we were going to get there. Now, that particular race, we came in the top 10 in the country and we won our division. And we should never have been able to do that. We weren't of that quality, but we were what I would say a high-performing team. And I would say in sport, it's maybe easier to see a high-performing team in the work, than in the workplace. So why? What is missing when we look in the workplace? So let's have a think about that. So what would you see? What might you hear from these teams in the workplace? We've caught some of them so far.
I mean, engagement and empowerment.
Yeah.
Purpose.
Positive speaking. So the conversation would have a positive spin, not like blame game or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then there should be synergy.
Yeah, I see in the chat we've had respect as well. Respect is I think is quite key.
You'd also have conflict, but it would be positively resolved.
I love that one. Yeah, positive conflict. I had one team that was really good at that. It got painful at times, but I'll tell you a bit more about that later. Anything else? Yes, psychological safety, absolutely. Passion, high energy, I'd call that. Yeah, passion and high energy. They definitely trust each other, trusting. Creativity, yeah. Diversity. I think that diversity also helps with that sort of positive conflict. We're coming at different angles at things.
If we didn't see it, the motivation.
Highly motivated, yeah. So we've got positive conflict, we've got great communication. They're very outcome focused often. They work towards a common and aligned goal. They understand their roles. They also understand who does what. That's quite important in the team. Where there's ambiguity, there's often causes issues. Feedback of culture. I'm not sure anybody's called that out, but they're learning and growing. They're listening to each other. They're learning as they go. Maybe they have an experimentation mindset. They're definitely high energy and they're empowered. So let me tell you about a story. This goes back to the 90s. Now, this was the first time in my career, and my career was quite long by that time, where I saw a really high-performing team in action. So I'll tell you what I was doing. I was the development manager for that team. We had about 13 technologists. We had skills ranging from, we had the architect, we had developers, back end, front end, we had DevOps, and we had QA and all in the team. Let me explain some of the challenges that we had. So in the late 90s, we've got the French World Cup coming up. And the thing at that time was that digital cameras were in their infancy. Wi-Fi was definitely very much in its infancy and the internet wasn't great. So when our photographers on the sideline took a picture, it would take a long time to get that picture with associated text back to the editorial desks, an hour or more. They would have to download it and send it along modem lines. The pictures weren't high resolution. Nobody at that time in the world had the technology to transfer pictures from live events in a seamless and fast way. Pictures, as I say, were low resolution. Very much through manual processes. So when a sports editor is wanting to get his newspaper out fast, he will typically take the first appropriate picture that he sees, and that one will make it onto the newspaper. And we wanted to get ahead of our competitors. So what did we do? We started to leverage some of the new technology that was coming in. So back in the 90s, digital cameras had just arrived. And by the late 90s, they were able to take pictures up to 1 meg. Seems tiny now, but it was big stuff then. One of these cameras cost us £10,000. So it was a lot of money for a 1 meg camera. Internet speed still fairly restricted. And let's say Wi-Fi we were starting to play with. We'd built our own backbone of a network using satellites as well to try and get over some of the issues around phone lines. So the tech was changing fast and we wanted to be able to take advantage of this. So what we did was we worked very closely with our editorial teams. They had the same systems and interfaces as our customers to try and develop a solution. My team really understood what the ask was. They had very clear vision and goals of what they were trying to achieve. They had hard, dead timelines because it was that France 98 World Cup they were trying to achieve. So as a manager, what I did was I empowered them to organise themselves, and I supported them by trying to remove any blockers and by spending a lot of money purchasing all the latest tech that they needed. The team decided themselves that they wanted to try something as soon as possible, albeit with limited functionality. So the first test they did was in 1997 at a Spurs match with some Lucient Wi-Fi kit. And the guys learnt a lot from this, and they started to adapt their solution accordingly. The team were highly motivated, and they wanted to create a solution that was way ahead of our competitors. So they worked very closely with the editorial teams to try and do this and get that excellence that they needed. They did it. It was amazing. We were the first media company in the world to be able to send pictures from the pitch side using Wi-Fi, and we got them to the editors' desks within 10 minutes. Now, as a result, Reuters pictures dominated all the sports papers all over the world for the '98 World Cup. This was a fantastic achievement. So this was a truly high-performing team. From what I've described in that story, what characteristics can you see that help them be high-performing?
Being empowered.
Yeah. So clear and common goal I've got, somebody's put in. Thank you, Rebecca.
A clear problem to be solved.
Yeah, they had a clear problem, didn't they?
Yeah, shared ownership.
Yeah, shared ownership, that's absolutely key.
Allowed to run a validating experiment before.
Yeah. Funding, yeah. Money was almost no object. We wanted to be the first. Open mindset, no, yep, absolutely no fear of failure. Well, they probably did have a bit of fear of failure, but they ran with it.
And someone said growth mindset also in the chat.
Oh, growth mindset, absolutely. So this predates Agile, right? But it does sound like some of the Agile values are coming out here. So indeed, they had a unified and clear vision of what was needed and why. And they had a shared understanding that helps guide their efforts and their decisions. They were very much aligned and focused. It gave the team a clear sense of purpose. And this is a really important factor regarding team effectiveness. They certainly had trust and respect. High-performing teams are built on a foundation of trust and respect, and they supported each other. They understood who was doing what and how they planned to do it. They had really excellent communication, not just with each other, but with the wider organisation and the environment. They felt comfortable trying new things and taking risks. So in summary, they had the environment and the support they needed to become a high-performing team. Okay. Let me tell you some other stories. So now we're in the 2000s, and I went to a company called Iris Software. Now, Iris Software made a suite of products for the accountancy market. So it's very much legislatively driven in nature. So they had release dates that were very much predefined by the government, and also what had to go in the product was predefined. The key thing here was this product was about 25 years old, and it was still being ground out. They didn't have cross-functional teams. Development and tests were two separate departments. They were actually divided into two different buildings. Most testing was manual as well. They didn't really understand their customer or their products, and they didn't work on a regular basis with their product owners. Product owners would never prioritize their work. Everything was just purely a must-have. So what might you be able to do you think, in this situation to start to create the environment for a team that's faced with these sorts of problems? Any thoughts would you like to share?
Relying on collective intelligence and asking them what they thought the problems were, rather than assuming ourselves out of context.
Okay, do you want to kind of elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, for instance, what was the problem if having development and testing in different building? How that would have impacted the communication between them? Was that one-way communication? Was that we do and then hand over, no longer responsible and accountable? All these kind of powerful questions, I would say. And followed by, and if you're uncomfortable with that, what would you like to be changed?
Yeah, that was absolutely that. You've nailed it. What the first thing was I did was I tried to bring that QA and devs into one team so that we could start to shorten the feedback cycles. That was a big step forward. Anything else that you think I could have done to help move these teams? Guys, please shout out so I can hone in a little bit more on what you're saying. Know your customer. Ha, yeah. So that was one thing I did was I got them training on their own products, so the developers, so they could actually understand how the customers were using it. We got our customer support guys to come and do that. So absolutely, we tried to move towards that sort of customer centricity. Business to prioritize. Yeah, I coached the product owners in that they couldn't have everything as a must-have, and that they had to actually say whether if something was a priority one, was it a higher priority one than the other high priority one? So yeah, there was loads of things that I started to do. But what you can see here maybe is that what was holding them back was their environment, rather than the ability of the people here. So the next company I went to was a company called JDA. Now, JDA are typically known for supply chain solutions. The part of JDA I worked for was the bit that does the price fixing. So, you know, when you go on to an airline and you try and book a seat and you go back the next minute and the price has changed, that was our software. We were doing lots of modeling behind that to say, supply and demand, we can up the price, we can lower the price. Now, this again was legacy software. It was probably about 15 years old, so positively modern compared to Iris software. But the job here I had was to actually start a transformation from waterfall to Scrum. We didn't really know why we were doing it, other than everything seemed to be painful, so Scrum must be the answer. Typically, the teams were only releasing once a year, or at most twice a year, and the whole process was really painful. So by introducing Scrum, we were able to really highlight some of the problems that were holding us back. So here for these teams, it was around technical practices and technical excellence. There was a mountain of technical debt that had grown up over those 15 years. Testing was all manual, and the testing would literally take the same amount of time as any development effort. It was a 1-to-1 ratio, not good. Product owners typically did upfront requirements, and then they would only re-engage with the teams once testing was done, and then they told them it was all wrong. So any thoughts on how we might have lifted this team towards higher performance and engagement?
Provide them with some consistency, knowing that the requirements won't change mid-sprint. Reduce the deployment timeline.
That was a big one. We tried to work out how we would get those deployments, the releases shorter. So absolutely, but what was holding us back there was the technical debt, especially around automation and our testing. So we did a lot of work on that, made it massively improved, created some automatic tests or automated test suites, and we started to shorten those feedback loops. The other big thing we did was we actually got much more engagement from the product owners. This was a difficult conversation that I had with the CTO, and I said, if you're bringing in Scrum, product owners part of the team, and he's like, oh no, you don't need to speak to the product owners. There's a lot of discussion there to make sure we got her time. that made a massive difference, because now she was giving them smaller bite-sized bits of work. They were demonstrating it to her, and we were getting earlier feedback. These teams were moving towards higher performance, but they still had a massive way to go. Their ways of working were really held back by their technology stack and their solutions. So what else do you think was holding these teams back for both of them? And what do you think was different from the Reuters team? Culture? Interesting you say culture. They all had quite a nice culture, all of them. So maybe not so much culture, unless you want to try and elaborate on what you meant by culture. Diego, just call out. I was like, unfortunately with the chat, I can only see some of it.
Just to elaborate on a culture comment, it was people are used to ways of working how they are working.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so stuck in their ways type culture.
Yeah, is this as good as, yeah, this is what the norm is.
It was interesting, they all had a willingness to change. So, well, that's not strictly true. The product owners didn't, but the developers certainly did. How did it differ from the Reuters team?
To me, it sounds as if they're not all pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, I would say that absolutely. We didn't have clear goals. So that pulling in the, people would pull on in all different ways. Reuters had funding. Yeah, I think the other thing to notice is that was a greenfield project that the Reuters guys were working on. So they didn't have that technical debt baggage behind them.
And courage.
Courage, yeah. Yeah, they I guess the other teams were very much stuck in their ways, as you said about the culture. And so it was much harder for them to be courageous and make changes. But the thing really holding these guys back is their environments, right? They were stuck in these ways of working, whereas the Reuters team had absolute freedom to do whatever they needed to get the stuff done. Okay, Skye. Now, I know Diego's here from Skye, so he can tell you if I've got anything wrong here. At Skye, the teams here are set up to use Scrum framework using XP practices. So they had high technical excellence. They leveraged the latest technologies. They automated wherever they could. In the XP practices, they did pair programming 100% of the time. They did test-driven development. They had CI/CD pipelines. They did DevOps practices, and they had high adherence to refactoring as they went along. PO was part of the team. His engagement was continuous. They regularly demoed their work to each other as well as the PO and sought feedback. And they didn't wait to the sprint review for that. They would do it as anything was ready. They would call out and show it to each other. So it's very dynamic, very fast feedback loops. But the teams were typically either back end or front end, and they're in their focus. And the QA function was embedded in the teams. So you've got that kind of siloing from front end to back end, but the QA function is in there. They had a very much iterative and incremental approach. They created the smallest thing of value, and they tried to push it out to the customers and review how it was being used. So they really embraced feedback and tried to learn from it. So they used a lot of technology solutions to manage dependencies. They used stubbing, mocking, feature switches. There was definitely transparent communication, good psychological safety. They had healthy debate, so definitely conflict was there. It normally resulted in them, they had sets of bows and arrows in the team, in the area. They had soft balls, all sorts of weapons around the place that would be brought into play whenever they had any of this positive conflict going on. It's quite a dangerous place to work, but it was also fun, right? They definitely learnt from each other, and they were open to these discussions. So given you this, would you expect to see this as a really high performing team, and why?
I'll say yes, because I think the cross functionality and everything was there. Everybody, cross functionality was there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, I think it was all of the above that you mentioned. The team actually had an environment where they could succeed. So, and be able to experiment, try something new, and see if it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. But what was actually missing from these guys was we didn't really have clear vision and goals. So we're working very much piecemeal. So that just never lifted them to the next level. But within their piecemeal areas, if you like, the way that they were doing the chunking up the work and things, they were absolutely high performing. And quite hard work as well. But anyway, that's another story. Moving on from that, how do you think you can measure a team to see if they're high performing? So we've sort of talked anecdotally about behaviours that we might see, but how could we measure this stuff? Health checks, yeah. Emmanuel, you said KPI, but any particular KPI?
Basically, my thought is that, honestly, I'm just starting my journey. I'm just sharing my thought. Maybe there may be some key performance indicators to check how their performances are rated.
Okay, yeah. Anybody got any other sort of thoughts or suggestions?
Ability to learn and improve based on what is discovered.
Yeah, how can you measure that?
Practically what we did was the length of spikes and how many spikes were required. And there was also a way to measure the clarity of the work, because if the work was clear enough and it was already suitable with the existing environment, no spikes might have been required. If something completely out of the blue was required and we didn't have the certainty that the current environment could make it, then there was a spike. There was not wrong per se, but it was a good indicator of how we were diverging from the existing. And also there was a measure of ability to innovate.
Okay, thank you. So if I go back to the first one where you talked about health checks, well, what we did last year at Maersk was we used something called the Gallup survey. So I don't know how many people have heard of the Gallup survey, but this is produced by Gallup, and it's called the Q12 survey. And this is used globally to see how teams are engaged or people are engaged. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that highly engaged people that work together in a team will result in a high performing team. So from Gallup themselves, they say their survey is linked to greater performance outcomes. And it says 12 items. So there's Q12 because there's 12 questions. Give managers a framework to have motivating conversations with employees. I think we took a slightly different approach at Maersk in that we as a team had those conversations. They also have a massive database. They've been into 195 countries. They've got 25 million responses. So they can see how your organization is doing against others. So if I look at Maersk, I was working with 2 teams last year. And at the beginning of the year, they were on the 37th percentile. So that's compared to all other companies or other data that Gallup had collected, they were at the 37th percentile. This is a team in pain. Now, by the end of the year, we had lifted that to 96th percentile. So that is a massive change. I'm just going to describe some of the things that we did over the whole year to try and effect that change. It may be a recipe that you can use, or it may be something you need to adapt, but it just gives you some ideas of what you could possibly do. So the first thing we did was we made sure that everybody understood what the Gallup survey was about, that they understood the questions and what they meant by them. People tended to read into questions their own interpretations. So for instance, there's one question that is, the supervisor or someone at work cares about me as a person. And when you go back to people and you ask them how they interpreted that, they did not read the someone, they read supervisor. So the team definitely interpreted this as my line manager does or does not care about me at work. And that wasn't the question. So we had dedicated workshops around that to recognize, how we could grow a culture of recognition, feedback, and be supportive to each other. And then that question would start to rise because they're realizing that it's wider than just the supervisor. So we spent a lot of time on that. We then did very targeted themed workshops around specific low scores. From that, we could come up with an action plan that we would then take forward. And we did these quite regularly. The other thing that was missing was the guys did not understand what the vision, mission, and roadmaps were for our products. So we introduced that as part of the sort of ongoing cadence that we had around these workshops that we did all together. So we would, every quarter or every 6 months, we would do alignment of understanding, make sure we looked at those workshops, the results from last time, how we're progressing, and feed into it our vision, mission, and roadmaps, and see how our product aligns back to the strategy of the company. So that was one aspect that we did. The next thing was very people-centric. So we wanted to create a learning and growing culture. So we did specific workshops around, what do people in the team know? What do they want to know? What do they need to know? And what is it that we need to, that some people know that other people don't know, if that makes sense. So from that, the guys were able to come up with an action plan of, well, I know about this subject and I can do a brown bag to the rest of the team about it. Or the whole team don't know about this, but we know somebody in another team can do it. So they would organize a sort of a lunchtime brown bag session with another team. So they did an awful lot of proactive work around trying to understand the things that they didn't know that they felt that they needed to know. We also gave them half a day off a week to do individual learning so that they could upskill that way as well. We have lots of resources at Maersk that help support that. So I did an awful lot around that. There was a big issue about recognition. So when you say to the guys, how would you like to be recognised? The first thing they talk about is pay rises. So we did a whole workshop on that and talked about it's much bigger than pay rises. It's about how you treat each other. It's how you speak to each other. It's how you give each other feedback. We did a lot of work on that to make it sure that it was much wider. The other thing we did was some team building. So the guys went and played crazy golf and stuff like that. But we went one little step further. This was a UK-based team, and we took them out to sorry, it's gone forward without me meaning it to, sorry. So we took them out to Copenhagen, which is where our head office was. We did a whole load of team building exercises at the office, and we went to our own museum, which told us the history of the company. This was really empowering to the team. They started to understand how the company came about and the values that were underpinning it, and made a massive difference to how they connected to the company. So those sort of people-centric things helped build that. We did some technical things. So we did a health check. We did the Spotify health check and a slight variation of it. And we did this multiple times. We came up with an action plan off the back of that we fed into our backlog. We did a lot around technical debt identification, and we came up with a mitigation strategy around anything that we found. And again, we fed that into our backlog and we prioritized it. We did a lot of themed hackathons as well. We just started using Datadog. We did a lot more around Datadog, how we do that. We did another themed day on sort of gamification of security using Lego. We did a lot of learning and growing type things around that to help support how the guys were approaching their technical development activities. Ways of working. What did we do here? We needed to get the team to understand the why of why they were building something. We had a leader at the time who would say, guys, if you don't know why or the value of what you're doing, I'd rather you watch Netflix. And he was absolutely serious. He would bang on about Netflix an awful lot of times. And he was expecting any of the developers to be able to say why they were implementing a particular feature. And over time, the language changed completely at the sprint reviews. The guys would always start with the why and the value that they were delivering. Changed the whole focus and the way that they looked at things. Experimentation. So I did an experimentation in my 20s, and I'm not sure it was successful, but hey, everybody has a perm at some time. But being more serious, data. We needed to experiment and find what data we were going to use to test our hypothesis. Thank you, Holger. We needed to also make sure it related back to the customer. So we're trying to come, I'm getting lots of comments about the perm now. Thanks, guys. Needed to really get into the heart of why we were doing things, what the value was to our customer and how we'd measure it. So complete change of mindset about the way this team was thinking. We also really worked on our retrospectives, trying to make them much more effective. One in particular was what we called the waste snake retrospective. I don't know if anybody's done that, but we really looked at all our processes and where we thought we had waste in our system, and we tried to find better ways of working. And we were very proactive about how we did that and how we measured it going forward. In retrospectives, also actions from that were really followed through and measured our progress against that. Product. Well, our product owner had to change a lot of the ways of his working. Again, he had never explained to the team about how he aligns to company strategy. So that was a big win for the team when they suddenly understood how their product fitted into the big scheme of things. He really hadn't talked about the vision, mission, and goals. We got much more goal orientated, especially sprint goals as well as product goals. North Star, we had a North Star workshop, more than one, and this is where the whole team got involved in trying to visualize where our product would go. We did lots of things around personas of our customers and what we thought they might want going forward. So the whole team was involved in that to help guide the future of the product. So he had to start to think about the value as well, the product owner, so that he could describe it to the team, so that we could then come up with ways of measuring it. We created dashboards in order to test these things and to see if we could measure the value that way. So we did an awful lot of stuff around that. So finally, my musings, I go back to my sport again. So I really struggled to come up with a good metaphor or diagram that describes what I think needs to be in place to support teams to become highly performing. So I've gone back to rowing. And this is a crew from about 2019. So Holger, where am I in this boat?
You were promoted. You moved forward 2 steps. You were third in the rowing.
Yeah, I'm rowing at 6 in that boat. Just let you know that between 6 and 4 is the powerhouse of the boat, right? But, I just think that's because I thought I couldn't row. It was probably the safest place for me. But anyway, so let's have a look at how rowing in an 8 or any boat might relate to a high-performing team. So the environment. The water is at its best when it's flat, and this could be seen as having the right organisational structures and support in place. Flat water feels supportive. In the case of the boat, we have the right tech, so we have the best boat that we can. You know, if the water is rough and we have a poor boat, then we're not setting ourselves up to succeed. So that's my analogy there. So we need the right environment first to support the team. Then looking at the crew, right, we're all aligned. We've got a clear vision and goal. We understand our sense of purpose. We understand what we're trying to achieve. We are empowered. When we're out in the water, we're doing our stuff. We're trusted, we support each other. Everybody knows what they're doing. There is a different role for each position in the boat, believe it or not. There is trust and respect, and we've been doing it a long time. So some of this crew I've been rowing with for nearly 40 years. I don't suppose I should really mention that. We have a culture of continuous learning improvement, right? I'm still learning. I've been doing it a long time. The cox in the boat gives us constant feedback during the race, and we're adjusting what we're doing the whole time. And during training, we look to learn how to improve. We might have a coach with us. We certainly use data to guide us, and we discuss as a team what we're going to do next. We often have a bit of a hypothesis of what we might do, and that's generally involves going for coffee and buns and things. But anyway, we're always learning, and we're having to adapt all the time to river conditions, the weather, the equipment, and each other's. We have a path, we have a plan to achieve high performance. We put in the plan in place when we race. We measure how we're doing, and for some reason we can't stop racing. So I don't know if anybody's got a better analogy or better metaphor of how you might look at what is needed for a high-performing team. Is there anything that you feel I've missed? Cool. And there I finish. Has anybody got any questions or thoughts or feedback? So I'm Judy Graham, and feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn.
So well done, Judy. Thank you very much for that. Let's give her a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. So get your hands up if you've got a question. So it looks like Rebecca's straight in there. So that'll give the rest of you an opportunity to have a little think about what you want to ask. Take it away, Rebecca.
Sure. So there's the leadership element in here, and it's incredible sometimes how particular individuals can stand in the way of some of these things you're trying to do. Something as simple as, you know, you've got the product owner sold on the idea of a demo, you've got perhaps other stakeholders there, the team is down, and yet some member of leadership might say this is not a good use of time or something like that. So I guess we've all experienced this. I'm curious a little bit about like all the things that you've done when you were talking about where you went with these. Absolutely, 1000%. But to me, I think the challenge I face more often is how to do them in the face of some people who are really challenging in that way. So I'm curious sort of if you have any experience there where what did you do when there was a boulder in the form of a leader? Okay. Or many.
You're not talking within the team, you're talking outside
of the team. So people that are they have ideas on how the team should work and run, right? And especially when it comes to those outside forces, we want to deal with more tech debt. We want to bring in stakeholders. We want to get closer to customer. The team can work, but they have to start to push out, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting one. I think where I had some of the boulders, I was in a fairly senior position, so we were able to kind of hit some of those conversations straight on. I alluded to one at JDA. So I was kind of like the head of development there. So when they said, right, implement Scrum, and I said, well, that means we definitely need a product owner. And the CTO was like, oh, no, you can't. And I had to sort of sit in an office and explain why. You know, there was going to be a problem, and it's in the end, you know, I sort of said to him, let's just do an experiment and trust me for a bit and we'll see what happens. And the product owner didn't really want to do it either. She was very anti it. You know, why would I want to, you know, not just give them this document and walk away? And she first few weeks, she's like, oh, they keep bothering me. But then she suddenly said, oh, I see that I've given them the wrong information and I've made, you know, I need to correct this and I like what they're doing now. And so she suddenly started to turn a corner. He gave me the space to do it, right? After these, it's like, you want to do Scrum, then you must let me do this sort of thing. He gave me that space. It took time to build up the trust. If I had any leaders that have been a complete brocket, I'd say at some organizations where they're delivery, no, you can't do the tech debt. That's where you have to go with data, right? You just have to show that you're slowing down. And actually, that was something else I did at JDA. I was a bit naughty. One of the lead developers, who was like one of the top guys there, he goes, Judy, give me space to go and automate some of this stuff. And I said, I'm going to do that, but I'm not telling anybody that you're doing that, because we'd have got into trouble for that. So I empowered him. He spent a couple of months on it, actually, and suddenly he did a step change improvement. And then we owned up to what we'd done. I asked for forgiveness later. So it kind of depends how safe you feel in the organization, whether you want to take that risk or not. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it's of course what we're evaluating, but actually what resonated more with me, just based on my situation at work, is yeah, it would be useful for us to show them some data. The challenge is, if we're working in a way that a leader wanted, they will see the data they want to see. So we have to think strategically about how we might show, you know, when we were doing this, this is what was happening, and here's kind of where we are now. So yeah, I'm gonna give a think to sort of a metric story there that could be interesting.
Really good point that you highlight there is baselines. I worked in another bit of Reuters where we did not baseline when we started, and we made a massive improvement, and then they made us all redundant. And it was like, but we've made a 20% saving, and they went, prove it. And we couldn't prove it because we hadn't done the baseline. We only knew where we were now. So it was only anecdotally we could say, well, we've got these reports of stuff we've done. And it's like, good enough. So always baseline at the beginning.
Yeah, thank you.
If I may, I have a question. We talk about measurements. Do you hear me? Hello?
Sorry, Emmanuel, I think somebody else had their speaker on, so fire away.
Oh, yes, a quick question, I would say. Well, quick, there is no quick question. But meaning, like, we talk about measurements, KPIs, etc. But did you have also experience on measuring behavioring? Behavioring meanings, one of the value of Agile is face-to-face over process and tools. And I put KPIs and all this kind of stuff, which we need to have, of course, but I put in the process and tools. There was some company where the executive go down to see people, and they are not in a technocratic level. And that's create huge synergy. And I wanted to know if that you have this experience maybe also, and you consider this as a characteristic or parameter for high-performing environment, high-performing teams.
Yeah, actually, now you mention it, that was one of the big changes for that Reuters team, was they removed offices and they put us in an open area with the bosses, and the bosses would come and walk round. And they would say, what's going on? How's it going? So there was that interaction. So yeah, I hadn't really considered that before, but absolutely there was that connection there.
Yeah.
We've also got a question in the chat channel for you, Judy. From the rowing analogy, you mentioned that a great enabling environment is a flat one. How can so? I think this is the $1 million question. How can that be? How can that be achieved in a large old telecommunications company that is migrating to become a technology company and is adopting Agile and Scrum?
All right. No, it didn't. I didn't mean the environment is flat. It was the analogy is that the water is flat, so it's smooth. You're not getting a rough ride. Whereas the opposite to that would be standing waves on the river, and you don't move anywhere. Not as in a flat structure or anything like that.
But my advice is all you can do, Evans, is start with where you are now, and you've got to start evolving, and you've got to work out what are the things that are going to change in the future and what the implications of that are. But if any of us could make an answer to that and write it in a book, we would literally be millionaires.
Yeah. I would also say with that one, if you're an old telecoms company, have a good look at your whether you've got technology, tech debt practices that are going to hold you back, and throwing Scrum in there. I mean, that's what we found at JDA. Throwing Scrum just showed a lot of the problems. What we did was 10 sprints of development followed by 10 sprints of testing. I mean, that was just bonkers, right? None of us really understood what we were doing. But you've got to sort those problems out first so that you can do things in little tiny chunks.
If you reduce my phone bill and broadband bill, Evans, I'll come and do a shift for free for you. Any more questions for Judy? Now's your time. Get it while you can.
Going fast.
I do not have a question, but I would say that we talk a lot about high-performing team, and it's true. There's a lot of parameters to be high-performing, environments, a lot of things. But we have also a lot of performing team. And I think that's a value that we also need to consider. And right now I am with a team, they are in France, they are working a little bit in safe. So there is no high-performing in safe, you know, you're predictable, you can deliver, but they are very performing and, you know, enthusiastic and motivated. And so it's there. High-performing, no, but performing, yes.
Okay, so I'd like to quiz you a bit more on that. What is the difference, do you think, then? Or what would your team need to do to step from performing to high performing? What's the missing ingredient then?
Missing is the ingredient that we talked about here. For example, an environment. If your robot is not great, I mean, how do you want to high perform? It could be also when there is not enough focus, there is too much distraction or waste. You know, and so it's not just the people that we ask them to be the Superman or the Superwoman and the high performing. If things are not around, and then it's hard, but it's already good to be performing.
Yeah.
That's what I meant.
I guess that's very like the Skye teams, very much performing.
Exactly.
They had a few little things missing that just didn't take them to that high performing step.
Yeah.
I think that brings us to the purpose intent discussion, because if you do not have a clear goal or intent, you can be high performing, you can churn out stuff, but then you're in a feature factory being very efficient, but not really effective. So that's also some point one has to discuss and see what is necessary for the performance, what is meant by.
Holger, you may have cut yourself off before you finish then.
What is meant by performance, to make it clear. Probably I was too quickly to mute myself again. Sorry.
All right.
But great comment.
Thank you.